Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. Today's episode is number 47, and I'm so excited to have a special guest on today. And that special guest is Elizabeth DiAlto, founder of the Wild Soul Movement, divine creator of Untame the Wild Soul podcast, and author of Untame Yourself. Welcome to the Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can sparkle just a little bit brighter each and every day. If what you hear speaks to your soul, go ahead and give us a rating and a review in iTunes. You can also find us on SoundCloud and Stitcher. And hey, if there's somebody in your life that you think would enjoy this podcast, go ahead and share it with them. Well, hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, Kisma.
Hey, Nick. Hey, Elizabeth. Oh my gosh, this is so great. So great to be here, of course, with Nick and to have Elizabeth. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who do not know, you will soon because Elizabeth has a fabulous podcast and I'll even be a guest on it very soon. So I want everyone to check that out as we dive into the show notes later. But it is the Untame the Wild Soul podcast. So make sure you look at that in iTunes and we'll be coming back to that and some more stuff. And Nick, anything you want to shout out today before we get rolling?
Well, I'm always excited to have a guest on.
Mm-hmm.
And especially a guest as fun as Elizabeth. We know Elizabeth from around and actually used to be neighbors for a little while. And it's so much fun to have somebody on the podcast who's just like, vibrant and funny and really ready to answer any questions. So she said, so I guess we'll just see what comes out.
Let's do it.
Yeah. And not just that, Elizabeth is a person who is walking the walk, right? So
Yes,
as you
indeed.
know, we don't have a lot of guests on our podcast, but when we do, we really make sure that they are a human that is defined in their choices and lives their teachings. And man, she's just got so much cool stuff going on. So Elizabeth, how's your day going?
Well, better now that you guys boosted me up like that. Thanks.
Well, what I've noticed in my secret intention is, you're such a great interviewer. I mean, you have so many cool guests on your podcast. And so I wanted to take this time to be able to elevate you the way that you elevate others. That was really important to me because you're a dear friend and a colleague and you're doing great things. And I guess, one of the things that came to me as I was contemplating, well, how, what do we ask and what do we talk about? And I know we're just going to start going, lots will come. But this untame yourself, when did you have the realization that, say, you were a tamed woman and that it was really freaking boring and you were going to go untame?
Yeah. So, I don't think anyone who knew me ever would say that I was entirely tame. But what it really means to me is once you gain the awareness and you start to look around and you realize that you've been agreeing your whole life to these constructs, this programming, this conditioning from whether it's your religion, whether it's the kind of school you went to, the kind of company you worked in, your family's beliefs, mindset, whatever. That to me is where the taming comes in, because when you haven't questioned any of it and you're just kind of going along, living according to all these things that all these outside sources just laid out for you, that to me was tame. And I started to realize that, and it's interesting. I consider myself to have these really two different places of origin. There's like my family of origin, but then because I've been an entrepreneur for so long, it's like the business or the entrepreneurial family of origin as well. And so I've had to really dissect and unwind and deprogram and upload new operating systems on all these different kinds of beliefs and ways of being and ways that I had functioned before. And so now it's actually more, Kisma, I know you talk about those soul energies in alignment with that like divine self-expression, right? Like I'm just me all the time.
Right.
It's congruent. There's no longer any disparity between who I am behind the scenes and then how I'm showing up in the world.
So when you talk about living untamed, right? You're full out, you're fully expressing yourself. You talk about what you want, and you're willing to go after it. But how do you balance that when you run into somebody who's really just not ready to hear that? right? Do you tame yourself in that instance, or do you just be full out and not worry about what they say? Or is there a middle ground there where you communicate with that human from where that person's at in a way that's, maybe a little more gentle?
I love that you asked this question because it's super important, because I think there's a line between me being untamed and fully expressed and being like a jerk or being super inconsiderate. I think one of the most untamed things we can actually do is allow other people to have their own experiences and really honor where somebody else is. And the inherent problem with this question is that there's an assumption that I'm ever going to know where someone's at or what they're ready for or what they're not ready for or whatever. So I think the most responsible and considerate thing to do, which I'm doing this all the time, is to not give people unsolicited feedback. I'm really big on this because it's also an issue of receptivity. I'm asking questions. I stay curious. I ask people, hey, are you open for this? Or what do you think about this? I get a gauge for like where someone is. And then I use my internal guidance. Like this is one of the things about being untamed is about trusting yourself. It's about being willing to listen for your own internal feedback and go, I'm going to trust myself here. Yeah, I'm going to push this edge a little bit with this person and see what happens. Or not, you know what? Here's a filter I use a lot, which I originally got from my friend Kate Northrup. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said right now? And does this need to be said by me?
That's great.
Because there are some times, and this related to psychic senses and things like that, there are times when you can see or sense something that someone else is not aware of. And it may or may not be helpful for them to become aware of that in your presence.
Exactly. Have you ever had anybody tell you something like that?
Yeah.
It's the worst.
Actually.
It's like, why would you tell me that,
Because then when the mind can get a hold of it, good luck. You're going to perhaps manifest things that you wouldn't have otherwise. Like it wasn't time. Yeah. So it's a fascinating thing. And I think it's a fine line. But the most important thing is to be tuned in with your own internal guidance. So you could do that check-in and be like, do I really want to go here with this person on this thing right now? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question and important, I think.
Elizabeth, when you talk about that untamed, like the word that comes to me is completely authentic, like totally just like you said, who you are in front, behind, what you're teaching as you're working. And I imagine that for your tribe, and I'd love to hear a bit about your tribe and the kind of people in it. This is so refreshing to them. And I bet they end up finding their way to you because of that element in you of being so authentic.
Big time. Yeah. Especially because we live in a time where with Facebook, with technology, social media being so prevalent, people are kind of used to being sold to all the time, right? People are used to spiels. And people are used to, everyone and their mom being an expert and a teacher on things that they're not really experts and shouldn't be teaching. So I do get a lot of people like, God, it's so refreshing. Like you're so honest. It's so raw and so real. And again, to me, if I'm not getting that, that's when I know, hey, am I in alignment? Am I being congruent? Am I walking my talk? Because, unfortunately, we live in a world where that's like, quote, rare. But that is something that people come in and they're just dying to be themselves.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, when you, I know you've worked with a ton of people, and what do you say when you see somebody who's just so kind of like stuck in the box? It's like they're so repressed, kind of living behind that mask or like putting on the happy face and all those kinds of things. Like, what are some of the things that you see that just really keep people stuck in that? Like, what are the fears? What are the anxieties? Like, what are all the things that keep them in that place?
The number one thing I would say is the enormous misunderstanding that to be in service means putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own. I think so many people, especially women, but you know what? I see this with a ton of men too, whether it's that they're trying to take care of their family or they're putting their spouse or their girlfriend or their boyfriend or whoever, their kids' needs ahead of their own. People don't realize that most people learn by like watching and modeling, right? Yes. So they don't realize that the example they're setting and the way that they're teaching people to treat them by putting everyone else's needs first is not helping. And it's actually not the type of giving that's energizing or even reciprocal, because they end up super drained because they're just doing everything for everyone all the time. They don't have boundaries. They don't say no when they want to say no. They say yes when they don't mean it. And like, this is where those little untruths really start to, those are the seedlings. And then they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then before they know it, they literally just don't know who they are. They're like, I don't know what I want. I don't know what my desires are. Like, who am I? They've identified with being a mom, being a wife, or with their career. And they really don't know who like the full spectrum of who they are is. They don't always know what they like. They don't know their preferences because they've just been going along agreeing with everyone else's for so long. So I feel like that's when, because it's like that inner part, really, like your soul, that really core who you are is stifled and suffocated because it's almost like if you have that junk closet. I don't know if you guys have this in your house, or the junk drawer where everything goes to die. But there might be like this one gem, this really like your favorite freaking thing somehow made it into that drawer and you haven't seen it in forever. And then one day when you endeavor to clean out the drawer, you're like, yes, oh my God, I didn't even know that was in there. That's kind of how we are with ourselves. We forget all these magnificent things that really make us who we are.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's like, be congruent with who you are and really what you're describing. I mean, we can take it to the absolute. One of the highest teachings is, the highest form of service is to seek self-realization. Now, I know, we're here to live our world the best way we can each and every day. And it's a very grounded spirituality, but that is one of the absolute teachings. And yet somehow in some way, our society has denied that for people, and people have and continue to make choices against that teaching. So I love that you're bringing that in, because it's an absolute teaching, and it is a teaching that we use every single day that can really help elevate one and give them more energy and more abundance and more love and connection. And if their parents like raise their children in a way that it has more ease and flow and creates awesome humans for the planet.
Yeah. And even the thing about energy, like we don't realize how much energy it takes to not be ourselves.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's exhausting to try and be someone else, isn't it? Like,
it's exhausting. And you have to have a really good memory, because you have to like literally remember what were the steps to doing this thing that aren't actually what I want to be doing. It's really a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a grind. Like your brain just seems to like really get caught up in so much, like just burning all this excess energy, and it like you don't even realize it. I don't think that underlying tension goes unnoticed a lot of times. Like, what have you seen for, like, what is the breaking point for people that you've seen most commonly that they're just all of a sudden they're just like, dude, I just can't do this anymore?
Their relationships or their health is just going super south. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people with digestive issues, adrenal fatigue, things like fibromyalgia, or like any kind of chronic fatigue or exhaustion, where it's just literally, there's nothing in the tank.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the tank. Or their relationships are so strained and there's just really very, very, very little ease. It requires so much effort to just show up and get through a day.
Yes.
Do you find that they're looking inside themselves at that point, or are they more looking at, like, say, an instance like just chronic fatigue, like I'm just tired, this must be a physical problem? Or is there an awareness out there that, like, man, like something's going on in me that I'm just totally grinding the gears in my head, and I think something needs to change there too?
So by the time people find their way to me, I call a lot of my tribe. Now there's a spectrum, right? Because I have a lot of programs and I have the book and I have the podcast. So a lot of people are a little deeper down the rabbit hole with me now, and they see what's going on. But a lot of people, when they first come into my world, are like spiritually curious. Like, it's like they're reaching that enough is enough point. A lot of people have been to doctors and tried all these things and nothing's working, or they've been in therapy for like years on end. I've had people say, I've done enough therapy to put both my kids through college, and they've just been either addressing it or not. But ultimately they're like, there might be something else here, because none of these other things are helping. This stuff's not budging. What the hell's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, are you working exclusively with women, or do men? I could see men being really attracted to the message and to that as well, but it seems more of a female movement. Do you find men coming your way as well?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, ever since I launched Wild to Movement 2 years ago, I have men who are curious. When I launched my book last year, even though it's called Untame Yourself, Reconnect to the Lost Art, Power, and Freedom of Being a Woman, I had a bunch of guys read it. There are Amazon reviews from men who were like, dudes, read this, first of all, the information is for you. And second of all, it's a nice glimpse into women if you want to get to know about women. And actually, I'm in the process right now of creating my first 2 programs that will be for men and women. Because one of the things that I find last year, so the podcast, everything was exclusively for women. And then last November, I decided to do a man month on the podcast. So I interviewed 8 men, and my women were like, more men, please. And one of the things, I talk a lot about masculine and feminine energy and how it's really, I call it a divine dance. It's like that sacred inner marriage. It's like if you want to have healthy relationships with men and women outside of yourself, you got to have healthy relationship with your own masculine and your own feminine internally. And so there's so many women. I think there's this misconception too that like women want to do this work and men don't. It's really not true.
Yeah, I agree.
Really, really not true. There's a lot of men who want to work on themselves, who have been doing work, but we still really live in like this big emasculation culture. So I think a lot of men don't get credit where it's due. And I think there is a lot of like consistent expectation that men are like doing it wrong or not doing enough. There's a lot of pressure on men in our current cultural landscape right now. And so I'm really wanting to create some spaces where men and women can come together and do this work. And it's not just men in their men's groups, women in their women's groups, and then maybe what they're learning on their own might be applicable.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think that's so cool. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed, because we've done, I think it was not too long ago, we were just kind of reflecting together. It's like we've done most of the work that we've done together in, similar programs, working with, same teachers and
trips
things
to
like
India,
that. Trips
right?
to India, right? And all this stuff that we've studied together. But what we have, and I don't think this is just unique to us, but we have such a unique way of using the tools that we have and such a different way of relating to it and a really different way of teaching it. I think part of that is like we're, more expressed in who we are as human beings. But at the end of the day, it's like, I think men and women do have a different way of going about things, and every individual has a different way of going about things. So it's so cool that you're bringing it into a dance where they can do it together.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's so much to be learned from like either. It doesn't, and again, I mean, with our society the way it is these days, there's plenty of people who are not gender identifying as the sex that they were born as.
Yes.
So to be speaking about these things on a higher energetic level in like masculine energy, feminine energy, which we all both have,
exactly,
is actually, I think, a really important service to be doing too, because some people don't identify with the traditional roles anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I know in some of the ways that we teach, it'll be like, bring on for a woman, bring more of your divine masculine out when you need to be more in action and take action, implementation. And for men, they can bring out more of their divine feminine when they want to nurture more, when they want to connect or absorb. I mean, all souls are feminine and masculine.
Totally.
You bring up so this is one of the questions that I wanted to bring to it. I think a lot of guys would look at like the untamed woman, like just, and how I see that, how I relate to that is just like a very expressed woman, like somebody who's out there, they're not afraid to be who they are. They're not afraid to say what they want. And they're an independent woman. They've got their own goals. They've got their own preferences. They've got their own, mission in life. And I think a lot of guys will look at that and be really attracted to it, but I'm not sure they actually know how to be with a woman like that. So I'm wondering from your perspective, like what are the expectations to be with an untamed woman?
Something that has been really interesting to me throughout my life, throughout my relationships, is there has always come a time when I outgrow the person I'm with. It's literally happened in every single relationship I've ever been in. And it's not even just about being untamed. It's about always kind of wanting more and being willing to evolve and not settling. And so I think at large, I think a lot of people, men and women, don't know what they want. So I think the thing that is sometimes most intimidating is when someone does know what they want and they're willing to work for it. And so the main requirement, if I could boil it down to like one simple thing, is just support me. Don't make me wrong and don't take it personally. If I'm quote, more successful than you. However, it is that you choose to measure success. For a lot of people still in our culture, it's money, right? So if a man is going to be uncomfortable because a woman makes more money than him, it's kind of a silly thing to be uncomfortable. It's very egoic, right? But just support, still find ways, this is helpful, to create space where she can still be a woman and she can be in her feminine. She could be soft and receptive and not have to be doing all the time or making all the decisions. Like something I say all the time in various contexts is just because I can doesn't mean I should.
I like
So
that.
yeah, like I can call the shots, I can run the household, I could do all the things. And me personally, I have a high capacity for doing a lot. Like I can hold a lot of stuff. I can get a lot of stuff done. Like me operating at 30% is like other people operating at 150%.
I
So,
believe that.
Yeah, totally.
you know, and so, yeah, that could be a lot for some people to be around it. And one of the things that I've noticed actually in my most recent relationship is that space is really, really important because, it's a lot to be around all the time. So
Yeah.
I would say the expectation is to be fully supportive and to just like ask questions,
Yeah.
stay open, be curious about like, what's the experience like? How can you be supportive? But then how can you also, it's important for women, even women like me, to make sure that their partner, if you're in, you know, a heterosexual relationship, your partner feels like the man, right? Like it's easy to like take control and like wear the pants. And I don't want to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't want to be doing that. If I'm doing that at work all day, I certainly don't want to be doing it in my relationship 24/7. So there's a lot. Does that any of that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that it makes me think of is if like, you know, in this example, if a guy were to come into a relationship like that and he weren't real clearly defined in who he is or what he wants, that it'd be so easy for him to get sucked up into that. And then before you know it, you're being, you know, you're the man all the time, which is, you know, totally not, you know, what you're designed for.
Right. I think with strong women and women who are defined in what they want, it's a little bit of that fine line, but I love what you said. It's like sometimes if you're running a business or if you're at work or running the household, you put the pants on, you get stuff done. But then there are moments where you just want to be you know, or you, the more feminine and not in the action so much. So to me, it seems like when both the man and the woman or two women or two men or whatever can be really their own individuation and to be fully embracing that and then embracing who the other person is, you've got a winner relationship.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, it's still going to take some work, you know. It always seems like some, you know, like there's just that dance, like the dance takes effort, you know, to really stay in balance with one another and to stay connected and to be communicating with one another to make sure that needs are being met.
It's an awareness. Yeah. It's an evolution and growth.
And I mean, at this level of consciousness and awareness, you got to recognize that it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
So to be willing and show up and say so when you're uncomfortable and why and ask for help is going to be it's just going to be so beneficial. Because one of the things that I used to do is I assumed that there was something wrong with me. Like for many, many years, I just thought I was too masculine until I read this great book by Sally Kempton called Awakening Shakti. I had not done much study into feminine archetypes. And I get to the chapter on Durga, the warrior goddess. And I'm like, oh, I've been feminine the whole time. I'm just like fierce feminine. Like that's probably my primary archetype, like that wild woman or like that fierce feminine. And I'm like, got it. Yeah. So I stopped making myself wrong. And then I just realized that if I'm feeling drained or like I'm doing too much, I could just ask. I used to think that I had to just like keep it to myself or try to like internally work out my discomfort. And all that really did was breed resentment because I was having expectations that weren't being met, but it's because I wasn't telling anyone what my expectations were.
Exactly. Yeah. We think everybody's as good a mind reader as we are, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
It doesn't work out so well. So
totally.
Cool. Well, I have a question for you. You know, as we've spent time together over the past year or so, you've mentioned your family. And I think I said to you a few weeks ago, gosh, I would love to be a fly on the wall at a holiday dinner. You know, can you just share a little bit? I know your mom is an exquisite figure in your life. I know your family's really close. How did they help guide you or send you off into untaming yourself?
Well, they didn't. No, I will say this. This is actually really funny. I'll give you a little bit of the evolution. Literally, something I appreciate big time about my mom is she was super insecure growing up. She was like a chubby kid. She wore glasses, super shy. And so it was always really important to her to instill in me that I could do anything I wanted and that I could be anything I wanted.
Oh, that's great.
So my parents were literally whispering that into my crib from like day one. And when it reached the point in my mid-20s where I started going down this path, and all of a sudden, because I was raised Catholic, they were like up in arms because this is not modest and all these things. And, some of the pictures on my website where half my body is out. I was like, listen, you made me. You did this. You told me I could do anything I want. You created this monster. So it's really funny. As part of like the in-between phase, back when I was in fitness, one of the things I did was I taught Zumba classes.
Oh, I bet.
And my mom, I was teaching them on Staten Island where my mom works actually for a lot of her staff for a while. And my mom would come to my Zumba classes. She just recently sent me this hilarious video, like this clip from I Love Lucy, where Lucy is at some like choreographed dance thing. And she's just like 7 steps off from everyone else. And my mom sends me the video. This gives you an idea of their sense of humor and says, "Was this me in your Zumba class?" And I'm like, yeah, if you add in the part, she'd be literally in the back row with a couple of her friends. And you could hear her from the front of the room going, "She doesn't get this from me." So funny. But
awesome.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, back in 2011, I actually did this boudoir photo shoot and I wanted to blog about it because at the time I was still in fitness. And this is when I really started to see that there was much more to like the gifts of living in a female body than looking sexy, right? Or losing weight or whatever, or being pleasing to society, culture, men, or otherwise. And so I was going to write a blog about it. And at the time, I knew my mom would freak out if I posted, there was a picture, basically I'm topless, but my arms, my hands are covering my breasts. So like there's no nipple or anything like that. It's not dirty. It looks more like art than porn. And I checked in, and by checked in, I was really asking permission. Yeah. Although I didn't see it that way at the time. I thought I was just being considerate. And we fought about it for like 5 days. There was yelling, there was crying, and ultimately I decided not to post it. And part of that was also because I was indebted to my mom, literally financially, because along the way, she helped me out a lot. She really helped me invest in a couple of programs to a couple coaches, masterminds, and stuff like that. So I really felt like she had been so generous with me that I should comply. And so it took me literally 31 months to get to a place where I was like, sorry, I'm publishing this blog. Yeah. And I published it October of 2013. It was called Getting Naked and Falling in Love. And falling in love meant with me. And I didn't ask. It just went up. And with almost 3 years having passed, like our relationship, we had really worked through a lot of things and stuff like that. And so she wasn't super into it, but it wasn't as much of a battle as it had been the first time I brought it up. Although months later, my little brother told me, just like a random Saturday morning, they're in the kitchen and my mom just like yells out of nowhere, like, "Does your sister still have that effing picture up on her website?" So they weren't cool with it. But I think what's helped them come around at this point is, they listen to the podcast sometimes. Yeah. They read the things that I write. I send them stories sometimes of like how women are being helped in the work. And they see that it's having an impact. And also I'm really, really happy and I have a great life. And I think, which is cool. And I appreciate this so much about my parents. They love me so much. So if I'm happy and healthy and safe, for the most part, they're cool with it.
That's beautiful. I mean, as a parent, I can totally relate to that. You met Zoe, I think, once, and she was getting ready to graduate college. I was like, look, just be happy. Go rent a boat in Vietnam and travel around if that's what you want to do. Like for a parent to have a happy child, man, there's no greater blessing. So I'm sure they are also super proud of you.
Super proud and sometimes still super uncomfortable. Yeah. I remember at one point my mom will send my dad in sometimes to have a tough conversation with me because she thinks that I'm more receptive to him. And this was spring of 2014. I'm literally my current website at untameyourself.com was in process. the creative direction was going on. Like I was doing photo shoots and all this stuff and writing my copy. And my dad calls me up one day, basically to ask me, like, can you be a little more conservative? And I lost it.
Oh.
And by the way, my dad, the impressions that I do of them, it doesn't sound like them at all. But I was like, no, I lost it. I'm like, this is exactly the problem. Women toning themselves down, trying to please other people. I am absolutely not going to do that. Like, my poor dad was in the wrong place at the wrong time, saying the wrong thing. But it was cool because for me, that was just like a big indication of like patriarchy, right? Exactly. Hey, how about you just tone it down so everyone else could be comfortable? Exactly. I was like, I'm totally not doing that.
Yeah. And it makes sense that it would start in the core of a Catholic family. And it's just, I mean, I suppose for the creative aspect and for how you work with people, it's not such a bad thing that you experience it yourself from time to time, even from people who love you dearly. But totally. It's like just to keep a pulse on this is what's happening worldwide for women and for men in many ways. So Untame. Well, tell us a little bit. I mean, this led you to your book, right? So tell us a bit about, because I know this book is so precious to you and it's already, is it on its second print?
You know what is interesting? Yeah, when I released it digitally last November, it took me 6 months. I was just a little burned out to get it to print. It went to print in May. So now it's a Kindle and in print. People keep going, is it on Audible yet? And I'm like, no, I'll get to it eventually. And I'm actually so I self-published, but I'm signing a contract with a traditional publisher to get it in bookstores sometime next year. Right. And so I need to do one more edit, which I'm almost nervous to open it up and do that because I am literally such a different human from the person a year ago who wrote that book.
Right.
I need to maintain the integrity of the book where it is, but there's a couple things that I do really need to fix.
Are you afraid you're just going to tear the whole thing apart and want to rewrite the whole thing?
Yeah, no, but it's a really good entry point to the work and it's very simple. Like it's actionable. And that was the most important thing to me. I think in the, there's self-help exhaustion, right? Where people just read, listen to every podcast. And Nick, you had shared this when I posted it on Facebook the other week, but people are ingesting way more than they're digesting. And it's actually not helpful. It just creates more confusion, more to do, more reasons for people to feel inadequate if they've read all these books, but they haven't followed the step and they're not getting the result. So, I like to keep things super, super simple and actionable.
I love that. I mean, if we look around today, and I'm sure all our listeners will agree, we've got faster computers, faster smartphones. Pretty soon we won't even have to do anything but look at our smartphone. It's going to talk to us. We get information, answers to questions at a moment's notice. Yet society is still suffering mentally and emotionally and physically, probably more so than ever before. Which just goes to prove and show like information isn't the answer alone. Knowledge is beautiful. Wisdom to me is it. But being able to take the right information and integrate and implement into the world for our own self-growth.
Yeah, totally. And the right information for you, right? Because what works for me might not work for you. Exactly. I mean, I wrote that in the intro of my book. I was like, listen, just because I'm writing this thing does not mean I'm correct. So read and take in what resonates for you. Maybe come back a few times and see other things will resonate at different times, but certainly don't assume I'm right and don't make yourself wrong if I suggest something and it doesn't work for you.
Yeah,
this is great. What like life and learning is about. You got to try things out, have experiences and go, oh yeah, that was for me. Or, oh, no, that is not my jam.
Well, and just being able to practice the art of inquiry. Rather than right, wrong, good or bad, like, does this work for me? Is this, as I want it to be? I'm just inquiring if this is really a truth for one's life. I mean, that in itself is something that's not always taught in schools. They're taught like, be this way, act this way. If you don't fit in and you're going to get in trouble. And that just sucks.
Yeah. Well, I personally feel like that's like the fundamental piece of education that has really been missing or just, kind of like brushed over is that like just what you said in that first statement, like that's the core of it is like, just, you are responsible for taking this information and doing something with it. It's like when you take in that information, you become responsible for it. And I think that's where a lot of people get like, so they get really heavy and bogged down because they're trying to be the good student and they're trying to do it the way that everybody told them. And they keep like, round with the same, like just packing more information. Now they have all this vast resources of information, but they're not doing jack with it. And their lives just get more and more stuck.
Right. Because I think a lot of people, what Kismet was saying about inquiry is if you don't know how you learn, I need to handwrite things. So I would read through, I would read chapters, I would highlight a textbook, and then I would literally need to write out everything I highlighted if I had any hope of retaining it. I could not just study it out of a book with a highlighter. And typing it, not the same. I literally had to handwrite things out, and that's how I would study. I also just learned way better through storytelling. Like I'm going to pick up on metaphor much more intricately and deeply. Like that's going to actually stay with me more than reading like a step-by-step process for something. Whereas some people aren't like that. So to kind of circle back, the conversation we were having about relationship earlier, I've learned a lot. I've studied a lot of material by a woman named Alison Armstrong this year. And one of the things that I loved about one of her books that really impacted me, which is called The Queen's Code, it's written like a novel. It's written like a story. And she really brilliantly works in characters that pretty much represent all the various types of people in life that would be interacting and engaging with her content. And a lot of people get a lot out of it, but every once in a while I'll have someone be like, I can't read the book. Her storytelling style, it's just not for me. They want a checklist.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, you know?
Exactly. And if we understood that in terms of education, just speaking about how people learn differently and children learn differently, and it would be a much happier planet, I believe.
Well, and I think about standardized tests, right? Because I have friends who were like brilliant that would bomb their standardized tests because that was just not a format that worked for them.
Right. And it's also that other piece of just like verifying the efficacy of the information, like just like really looking at it and being like, is this true? Is this so? Like, is this the highest truth available? And really, developing that ability to discern
big time,
really clearly. And that's one of the things that I always really appreciated about you is like, you're such an avid learner. Like you seem so passionate about learning, and you'll just like geek out on the next book or the next energy thing or whatever. And it's like, man, I'm so inspired by that. I just think that's awesome. And it's like you learn, but you have you also seem to have a great sense of discernment about how you do that and what you take in, and how you determine whether or not that's actually valuable in your life.
Yeah. And I think about even, someone like my little brother, not good at school. Kid can play, he could just pick up an instrument and play. I know you guys are musicians. I took piano lessons for years. I could read music. He can't read music, and that kid can play the piano way better than I ever did in my life.
Oh, what a beautiful gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting to know yourself. And I think that's part of it, right? Like the core of Untame Yourself, Wild Soul Movement is this sentence: everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you.
Yeah.
And people will ask me sometimes, why don't you say everything you need is inside of you? And I'm like, because I want to emphasize it's never not been that way.
Yes.
And anything that's led you to believe otherwise was just inaccurate.
Right.
And so it's always been there. It might be buried and it's not going anywhere. Like you can't lose it. So if you just keep peeling back the layers and all the stuff that's on top of it, like it's in there. It's in there. It's in there. It's in there.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a choice about what direction you go. Do you throw more stuff on top of it and bury it further? Or do you just keep peeling back the layers? Like that's the choice point that everybody gets to make, every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, totally.
Speaking about peeling back the layers, has there ever been a layer that you thought was the right layer to peel back, but it ended up not being, and you just felt like, oh, this choice or this thing was really absolutely not what was in your best interest?
Yeah. So I got to answer this question two ways. I don't believe in mistakes. I really believe even if I went down a path that ultimately was not the path for me, walking on that path led me to what was, or led me to a lesson. Like something I say a lot is, very often, there's not a direct path from point A to point C. We have to get on the path from A to B to realize, oh, this is not going to get me to C. And then we pivot. So like the path is never linear. And sometimes we do have to bark up the wrong tree to go, oh man, good to know. That's not for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of that came up for me in entrepreneurship. The first couple of years of building my business, really 2 whole years, I was studying with and learning from people who were just doing really different things. and really different from me. Like good humans, good integrous humans, but not really operating from the heart space in the sense of caring so much about what their contribution to the world was. Like they cared more about traffic and conversions, which is cool.
Yeah.
And they were more in like the social media and entrepreneurship space, not as much like personal growth, help, transformation, healing, which I was more interested in. And so I was basically like failing, just throwing things up against the wall to see what would stick for a couple years. And I'd have like mild successes here and there, but ultimately at the end of the day, I couldn't always pay my rent. I'd be like calling my mom and it would help me out with a couple $100 here and there, which was mortifying. It was just like demoralizing because this was towards my mid to late 20s. Like feeling the shame of like, I should have figured this out by now was big for me. That was going on. And then just realizing that some of these systems, they just didn't work for me because I couldn't be fully expressed within these ways of doing it, So that was one of the things when I said way back in the beginning of the interview, I had to kind of like work on my entrepreneurial family of origin stuff.
Yes.
There was some wounding there. There was some healing. I had to like let it go and also realize how I had put certain people on pedestals. And when you put someone else on a pedestal, that requires that you stay, quote, below them, right? Which means if I'm worried about surpassing my mentors, I'm not going to. And again, surpass. These things are very subjective, right?
Yes.
For me, I care more about freedom and flexibility and being able to do what I want, when I want, with whoever I want. The fact now that I make more money, and money for me is just a choice amplifier. It just means I have more choices. But that was some of those paths. I was like, damn, I could look back and go, I wasted a lot of time. But instead, I'm like, all right, let me gather up the learnings, dust myself off and move on.
I want to circle back to one thing that you just said that I thought was cool is like the money being the choice amplifier. So if I understand you correctly, it's like the freedom is actually that's the core choice. It's a choice to be free. It's a choice to do what you want when you want and to do it with whom you want. It's like, but the money is just the thing that allows you to do that with more freedom, with greater flexibility. Am I understanding you correctly? Because I think that's really
100%.
Okay,
100%. Cool. And I did many years ago. I read, it was like one sentence. Here's why I love books. You guys know, I mean, you see me posting. I talk about all the books I'm reading all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't finish all the books because fairly often I'll get a sentence or two, I'll get a nugget and I'll be like, that's what I needed.
Yes.
And if I open it back up again later and there's something else, I'm like, great, looks like I needed that too. But I'm
so glad it's not just me.
No, I
feel bad about not finishing my book sometimes.
No, and years ago I used to force myself, but what kind of use of time is that, right? And who's checking over my shoulder? Who cares, right? So, because I'll get a sentence. So here's why I started to say that. There's this book called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by a guy named Ramit Sethi. And there was just something in there. And I realized my ultimate financial goal, because for many years I was setting these financial goals based on what everyone around me was doing. And I never hit any of them because I wasn't actually connected to the numbers in any way. But this sentence that I read, it's like, I literally want to be able to do whatever I want. And money is not a factor.
Yes.
So I don't ever want to have a desire or a whim that I can't follow because I can't afford to do it.
Right. That's beautiful. Freedom.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's true freedom.
Yeah. Well, there's a question I love to, before we dive into how people can get your book, there's a question I love to ask humans because it's always just, to me, the answer is so awesome. What is the one thing that you've always desired to do, but you've yet to tell anybody?
See, this is the thing. When you're living an untamed life,
you tell it all, right?
You kind of just tell people things all the time. Is there anything I have a desire to do that I've never told anyone?
Sometimes it's like that little fleeting thought of like, oh, one day I'll go and do X, Y, and Z or you really do speak your dreams. So I doubt if it's a big dream, but is there anything that you haven't really told a lot of people?
I think it's this lately that one of the biggest things that I'm geeking out, and you guys know this because we geek out on it together, is a lot of the energetic stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm coming to realize, especially within the last few months, how I've always had, just like all of us, I'm not special. I've always had gifts. I've always had psychic senses. I just didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
And when you don't know what you're looking for, you can't see it. Right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, things like I didn't realize it was like earlier this year that not everyone sees stuff when they close their eyes. Like some people close their eyes and it's just black. And so I see all kinds of stuff when I close my eyes, and I didn't realize that wasn't just like what everyone sees when they close their eyes.
Right.
And more recently, I'm starting to see when my eyes are open, what I see when my eyes are closed.
Oh, that's cool.
It sounds like a weird thing, but I'm super curious about that, not forcing it or anything like that, but just allowing these psychic senses to come online and whatever they are. Like, I don't need to be super attached to it. I don't need to proclaim I'm this, that, or the other thing. I really don't care. But it's just in terms of human potential, if I'm able to experience and do all kinds of things, and especially if any of those things are going to help me help other people, I want that.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great answer. Thank you.
That's an awesome answer. Yeah. I want to move things with my mind. Still working on that one.
I love when we're at stuff and you'll just throw that question in. So it's like at some point in a 2 or 3 day seminar, Nick's going to ask, how do I move things with my mind? All right.
I suppose that'll be a full podcast when you figure it out.
It'll be a whole series. Yeah.
There are like spoon bending workshops you could go to, right?
Yeah.
I actually did not know that.
Oh, you didn't know that?
God,
now he's going to go Google.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to go Google that actually. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I love this. Well, tell us how people can find your book.
If you go to untameyourself.com/Amazon, you got it.
Okay, cool. And we'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes.
Thank you.
And any other last thoughts you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys so much. It's even that last question you asked me, even though I talk about things super openly, I don't geek out on spirituality and energy and topics like that with everyone, because in some spaces it's just not, people aren't super receptive to it.
Yeah.
And so I love being able to have friends and colleagues that like we could go all in and talk about the weirder the better, because you need places and spaces like that. So for anyone listening, this is a great place to do that with Nick and Kisma. Like you could show up, you could ask your weird questions.
Totally.
You can, be super, super curious about all the infinite intelligence and various things that sometimes you just want to explore. And so I thank you guys a lot for being safe space for that. And also just knowledgeable, and also being people who continue to do your own work. So this would be, if I'm going to give any kind of closing thought, I actually posted this on Instagram today. Just show up, just keep showing up.
Yeah.
And it's not about, I think so often why we don't show up is because we're focused on what it's going to take to get to the finish line. When the fact is, all that matters is getting yourself to the starting line.
Oh, I love that.
Because you're not getting to the finish line if you don't start.
Right. That's right. And that's fun. Like getting to the starting line, like that's so doable. That's great.
So doable.
Yeah.
Every morning when I wake up and I start to have that conversation with myself about whether or not I'm going to go to the gym, I'm like, just get there. It doesn't actually matter.
Right.
Just get there. Get up, put on the clothes, even just getting in the car.
Yep. I have that same conversation. And every time I'm done, I feel better. Like I feel
so glad
awesome.
I went.
Totally.
So glad I went.
Yeah.
Totally. And also check out Elizabeth's podcast, right? Make sure you find that, The Untame the Wild Soul. It's on iTunes, and can they find it where else? On Stitcher?
It's in all these places. I don't even know because I don't do tech stuff.
All those places.
For the most part, there are not, which is cool for me right now. My brother's a comedian. But if you just search DiAlto, DiAlto, I come up because there's
awesome.
Not that many other ones.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's perfect.
So cool.
That's
Yeah,
great.
we'll make sure
it's on all those podcasty places.
Yeah, we'll
all
make
the
sure everyone
podcasty
has
places.
a link to that. Cool. Well, thank you for taking the time. We know you are super busy serving your people and changing the world. And this is just, it's so great to have you here.
Yeah, what an honor. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, my dear everyone, rock on. Send any questions you might have to info@sourcemovement.com. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Namaste.
Peace.